I think it's first important to clarify, this legislation impacts tax-exempt organizations under the tax code section 501c. Many of these tax organizations we recognize as the charities, United Way and so forth, foundations, social welfare organizations. They come in any variety. A social welfare organization, typically when we think social welfare, it means essentially organizations that are promoting the common good and the general welfare of the people of a community. Social welfare organizations. What's the problem then here? Is that we've seen so many social welfare organizations, the 501c4s, become not promoters of social good, but some of the biggest campaign spenders in our election process. And they use the loopholes in the tax code to be able to collect a whole bunch of money that usually Americans think goes to do social welfare, and instead is now being used to drive our campaigns. And so this is now the problem with this particular legislation, because this legislation says, you know what? While those organizations right now have to document who's giving them money, who's contributing the dollars to them, if it's bigger than a $5,000 contribution, this bill, guess what? It says, no, neither would any of those 501c organizations, those tax-exempt organizations, have to file the name of the contributor. At a time right now when so many Americans have become skeptical about our government's ability to promote the interests of our citizens first, at a time when so many believe our government is driven by special interests, we should be asking for more openness in our government, not less, in how we do business. Secret money is hijacking our American democracy. This bill would prohibit the disclosure of substantial contributions and promote special interest secrecy. What do I mean by that? Well, this bill becomes a license to secretly influence our elections. How? Foreign government doesn't like where American policy is going, so guess what? They want to influence who gets elected. What do? They don't make a contribution to a candidate because they can't under the law. What do? They can now give to an organization, one of these social welfare organizations, and let them use the money to politic in our campaigns. And guess what? If this bill becomes law, you'll never know the name of that foreign government or foreign government official who makes that contribution. It could be a 5,000 contribution. It could be a 5 billion contribution. You never have to report it if you're one of these tax-exempt organizations. What else? Drug traffickers who don't like that we may be getting tough on our drug laws. They don't like it. They want to elect people who won't be so tough, so they influence, not because you can't give the money, a drug trafficker won't give money directly to a candidate. You give it to one of these social welfare organizations. Social welfare organization under this bill won't have to report the contribution, the name of the contributor. That drug trafficker gets $5,000 or $5 billion, never disclosed. Who else? We're right now fighting ISIS. Say ISIS wants to make sure somebody gets elected to be the next president or member of Congress, doesn't like somebody else. How do they influence our elections? They get some wealthy, one of their wealthy contributors to give money to one of these tax-exempt organizations, and guess what? That ISIS contributor never gets disclosed. Since when do Americans want us to have a system in our elections where contributions can be made to influence our elections and we don't know who's doing it? And if you don't believe it's true that that's going on, then let me give you this statistic that'll blow your mind. 4 years ago in our last presidential election, the parties, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party combined, the parties that we know are there for politics, spent $250 million in the 2012 elections. Guess how much these social welfare organizations spent in that same election? More than the two parties combined.
Additional minute.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
The party spent $255 million in 2012 politicking. That's what they're there to do. They have a partisan position. So they are using their money that people contribute to politic. And by the way, when you make a contribution, you got to report it when you make a contribution to that political party. $257 million in 2012 was spent by these social welfare organizations on politicking. And under this bill, if it becomes law, guess what? Those contributors won't have to be identified. And so whatever your motives, you get to influence our elections without the American people, who can't do the same thing, because if they give a contribution, they got to disclose it, without the American people knowing who you are. I don't believe that's where this country wants to go. And I don't care under what good government kind of window you try to frame this, what you're doing is you're opening the door for secret money to influence our elections. As if it isn't bad enough how much our elections are influenced by people who have wealth and do much more than the average American can ever do. And so, Mr. Speaker, this is not a time to do that. Let's vote for openness. And if you vote for openness, you have to vote against this bill. I yield back the balance of my time.